All right. Let's see if I can do a quick introduction, but after let's see if I can just do like one introduction instead of having to like get so like
No, I like the multiple tries. I think it's good.
it's my Saturn moon opposition. I'm always like trying to self-express, but then there's like this big fucking Saturn that's like make it perfect.
Yes.
All right, let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to your monthly forecast. We are here to talk about the month of March. I've got my amazing, talented astrologer co-host with me today. We've got Mal Hasty in the house. How's it going, Mal?
Oh, it's great. I am so ready to talk about March, and I feel like we get a little change of pace this month. So I'm excited to discuss the astrology.
Me too. I completely agree. I love doing these recordings. I feel like it just aligns me, it aligns us for the month ahead. So, anyone out there listening, I hope it does the same for you. If this is your first time listening, Mal and I are two professional astrologers and friends, and we are here to kind of break down all of the astrology for the month ahead to kind of be your energetic guides, so to speak. If you'd like to follow along, I have made really cute little astrology calendars that are available in the caption below for you to download. You can take notes on them and just have that as a point of reference for all of the astrology that we're going to be talking about. In this podcast in general, Mal and I are going to first do a little bit of reflection of the month before prior. So we're going to reflect on February to start, which is really helpful. Sometimes it's just as important to look back as it is to look forward when we're using astrology. So we're going to do a quick reflection on last month, and then we're going to do just a brief overview for March and what it has in store, do a general vibe overview for March. So if you have a short attention span, that might be a great place to just stop and take a break. And then after that, we're going to dive in week by week and really unpack all of the meat that is the astrology for the month ahead. And we're going to talk about the new moons, full moons, all of that good stuff, and share wisdom of how to navigate all of this energy and talk about astrological implications on both a personal level and a little bit of the collective too. So I hope that sounds very good for all of you. Just some more tips for listening. If we do get a little technical in this podcast, which we do because we're astrologers, focus less on those technicalities and just jot down anything that we say that really resonates with you and pay attention to that message. So, Mal, let's dive in. Let's dive in with some of our reflections on February. How are you feeling about February? Now, full disclosure, we are still recording this in February. There's a little bit more of the astrology to go, but honestly, it's pretty chill for the rest of February. How have you been feeling about the astrology of February, and how has it kind of resonated with you so far?
Yeah, the month of February really did feel almost like a recovery period from the Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde that we started off 2022 with. So it almost felt to me like even though Venus stationed direct, Mercury stationed direct, I felt like I was still dancing in the shadows of that energy. And technically, we are still dancing in the shadows of that energy because Venus exits her retrograde shadow on March 3rd, and Mercury exits their retrograde shadow on February 24th. So there's just like still a little bit of like wanting to move forward, but not quite having the clarity with how to do so. So I would say overall, when we lack clarity, that's when it's easiest for our old fear narratives to creep in. So, and when we do have clarity about where we're going, it's easier to focus on, okay, I'm getting to point A to point B from point A. Like I've got my goals, I've got my clarity about how to get there. Fears, it's harder for them to creep in. But when we're like, oh, I don't know what's next, I don't know how to move forward, that's when the old insecurities are more likely to pop up. So that's kind of what February has felt like to me. I don't know about you, Kate, if that resonates at all.
Absolutely. And I like how you're talking about when there's no clarity, that's when our old fear stories pop up, because fear stories were very, very potent, even astrologically, because Mercury and Venus in their retrograde cycles really came into contact with Pluto quite a bit. And that's what Pluto does. It brings up fears and insecurities, and it kind of tests our fear stories. Like, oh, are you sure you want to do this? Here's the potential of what could happen, both good and bad. Are you ready for it? So I completely resonate with that example thoroughly. I also feel, and I said this on the last podcast, but February was really a bridge, if you will, between 2021 and 2022. The astrology of December 2021 and January 2022 was had a very, very specific tone to it. And a lot of those themes of that transitional energy kind of wrapped up in February. So, and I felt that very, very strongly. Um, it really was a time almost of kind of building on foundations too, because I think Mars and Venus have been in Capricorn for for February. It's kind of been, I feel I really do resonate with the fact that, February is kind of this month of integration where we don't know exactly where we're going yet, but we do know what we're building. And it kind of gave us an important foundation to build on for the rest of 2022. That's astrology that I just really felt very strongly about. It wasn't a month of astrology that was like particularly, aside from the Pluto return, which we can actually chat about in a second. But this astrology, the astrology of February wasn't crazy. It wasn't, oh my gosh, our hair's on fire and this was wild. I'm going to talk about the astrology of 2020, the cosmic guide that Jordan and I worked on. We gave astrology an intensity rating of medium at 2.5 out of 1 through 5. And I feel that, it was a month where we really were just working to integrate. We were learning how to build on these strong foundations. And I feel that. And I feel like heading into March with the experiences of February, I do feel like we have more solid foundations on which to build for the rest of the year, if that resonates.
Oh,
it really was a bridge. And March is really when the astrology of 2022 kind of bursts open.
Can I ask, what was the intensity rating that you and Jordan gave March?
So the intensity rating for March is high, and we have the intensity rating at 4.
Oh, okay. So we're getting
from 4 through 5, or from 1 to 5.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have all of our intent. This is like our quick monthly overview right here. I love it. I'm like obsessed with the content that we create. I'm like, woo! It's so much fun for me too. But actually, before we dive into March, would you like to talk about one thing that did really stick out in February on a global collective level that everyone was talking about? Like I could barely go on social media on February 22nd on 2/22/22 because it was just like, it was a little much. The talk of the 2/22 and the Pluto return of the United States. So for anybody out there, I'll give a brief summary and then we'll like kind of talk about it a little bit. But for anybody out there listening, the United States has a birth chart like everybody, like everything else. Countries have birth charts, businesses have birth charts, everything's got a chart. If it's got a date, it's got a chart. And the United States birth chart on July 4th, this signing of the Declaration of Independence, it also has a birth chart, and Pluto on that birth chart was sitting around 26, 27 degrees Capricorn. And this Pluto is extremely important in our personal charts and in any birth chart, especially me. I love evolutionary astrology, and Pluto is so juicy. It's a karmic signature. It's a signature of transformation, and it's a signature of, you know, soul level karmic identity. Pluto really has a lot to do with the soul. And you could even say that it has to, in the United States birth chart, it has to do with the soul of our nation. So Pluto takes 248 years to move one rotation around the zodiac. So this year in 2022, Pluto will actually return to the place it was during the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So on an energetic level, the Pluto return of the United States is going to bring up consistently in 2022 themes of redefining the soul of the nation and the soul of the United States. No doubt we have a very contentious year ahead of us. And on 2/22, literally at 2:22, at 2 o'clock, at 22 minutes, like on at 2 p.m. and 22 minutes Eastern time, President Biden gave an address, gave a press conference about how he was imposing sanctions on Ukraine. So literally on 2/22 was the first hit of the Pluto return of the United States, and it will happen again throughout the year. It's very important. It's going to happen first in February, second in July, and third in December. So although there's a lot of hubbub and a lot going on, and a lot of talk about the Pluto return now, it's actually a year-long process that's going to be with us all 2022. So that's my little spiel for anybody who hasn't heard of the Pluto return, or just so to give us some context. Mal, how are you feeling about the Pluto return of the United States? How are you feeling about that in February?
Yeah, I feel interested to let that unfold,
Mm-hmm.
and also pretty confident that there's a reason why our souls chose to reincarnate on this planet during the Pluto return of the United States. So
Absolutely.
I try to keep that in mind. But I'm thinking, when we're looking at the US Sibley chart, which is one of the most popular charts that is used to look at the signing of the Declaration of Independence and thus the birth chart of the United States, that 27 degrees Pluto in Capricorn sits in the second house of the Sibley chart. And when we're looking at the second house, especially in a mundane context, we are talking about like money, economy, budgets,
Values.
values, debts. So, I mean, there's just no doubt the fact that the Pluto return of the United States is happening in the second house of the United States. Again, these issues like minimum wage not being high enough to support a standard sense of living. Also, student loans still existing and not being eradicated, and the effect on the economy from like our generation suffering with that weight of our student loans. There's no rent control. There's no universal health care. Like all of this stuff is second house stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting that like we see these problems, and we've been seeing these problems really since like even like 2018 with the recession.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting to think like, like how much really has changed since 2018? I'm not sure if much has actually changed. I think the government has just pumped like a bunch of like fake money into
Second
the
house.
markets or however they do that. I don't know. Stock markets are fake. And I don't know. But anyways, there's a lot of money karma that's about to come up for the United States. And I think it's important to remember as individuals in this country, potentially like struggling to maybe even survive within this current climate. I think it's important to remember like not to take these things like too personally. It's not about your laziness or your lack of ambition or your lack of responsibility. Like there's this greater responsibility, a greater compassion, I think, that this country is being called to have for its own citizens. So that's my take on the flavor of the Pluto return of the United States and some themes we're going to continue to see.
Absolutely. And I think that this is certainly worthy of its own hour long episode. So Mal and I are really just scratching the surface on the transformational potential of the Pluto return of the United States. I didn't, I haven't this I think it's important to recognize that there's just a lot of content out there that can be a little doomsday-y when we talk about the Pluto return of the United States. And just keep in mind, there are like so many countries that have been through Pluto returns that have survived and that still thrive. I think that certainly this Pluto return is going to require us to re-examine our values, but also understand that this is part of a much larger process and a much larger cycle of evolution. And we live in the first constitution. I was a political science major in college. I am a total current events political junkie. That's part of who I am. Granted, in 2021, I needed a little bit of breathing room after 2020. It was a little crazy. But there is a lot on the horizon. The United States was the first constitutional democracy in the world. I mean, there were other democracies, but the United States really was the first one. So I think the whole role of democracy is I think you hear so much rhetoric now. Democracy is at stake. Our democracy is at stake. I think that although that is a little fear mongery, it's not completely off base. Democracy necessarily isn't at stake, but democracy itself is kind of transforming. And I think that the Pluto return of the United States is the year. This is the year in 2022 where a lot of our values are going to be transformed and redefined. Because on both internally, like within our own systems, but also on the world stage as well. What I love about astrology is that, it's hard to predict exactly how astrology will manifest, but the energy. So when you see things come up, it's easy to track that trajectory. And just because of all of these global escalations right now around the United States, NATO, and Russia, this is going to be a consistent theme all year long. I remember like this is with us to stay at least for this year, at least 2022. I feel like we can kind of expect to see tensions escalate and a redefining of world power. Um, I think that saying, oh, 222, that's like this exact date where shit's going to go down. I don't think astrology works like that. But I do think that Mars is a better catalyst and a better predictor of when global tensions kind of arise. So I do think that if we are going to see a very potent manifestation of this astrology we need to keep our eyes peeled on the date on early March, because that's when Mars and Venus will be conjunct Pluto on March 3rd. So I do think that March will bring up more escalating tensions that will continue throughout the entire year. I also think that July is going to be an extremely important month to pay attention to the news. That is when a lot of major Supreme Court cases are being decided. Like June and July, the Supreme Court's docket will redefine the Constitution, or it will have so many constitutional implications on a lot of issues in the United States, specifically a woman's right to choose what she does with her body. So that's a very, very important month to pay attention to the news in July. That's kind of what I've got my eyes peeled on in terms of the Pluto return. I know that 222 is a very catchy date, but I've really got my sights set on July and on February too. I think that's when it's a time to watch the news, to pay attention. That's where a lot of global tensions and domestic tensions are really going to arise during those months. That's just my quick prediction. Yeah, again, this is worthy of its own episode, but I think that it's worth mentioning for anybody out there. This isn't a time to be afraid, to be scared, but it is a time to pay attention to what is happening in our political landscape. And I know that politics is just a really triggering subject, and I love it because it's kind of like where I come from, and I'm just a very civic minded. I love current events. I love that stuff. I love paying attention to where we are in the scheme of history, and how that aligns with astrology just boggles my mind and fascinates me. But this isn't a time to get scared. It's a time to pay attention and to be even more aware and more civic minded than ever, and to really start paying attention to the systems that control our lives, and register to vote and pay attention to how you can, like, your role in it all. And don't get scared, get prepared. This is a time where we got to kind of keep our wits about us, so to speak.
I'll just say too, Kate, for the listeners and watchers that might be interested in just even learning more about Pluto as a planet, we do have an episode
we do.
on my podcast, the Witch Church podcast. It's actually episode 63. Kate was my guest, and we went through a bunch of stuff about Pluto. And I think we might, I don't remember, to be honest, but we probably did mention the Pluto return of the United States somewhere in that episode.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I also have a link to that episode in my Instagram bio because I love it so much. I had so much fun recording it. So anybody out there, you can find it in my IG bio. There's a link there too.
Cool. And
sorry.
Sorry. One more thing I wanted to say on the topic of like Pluto return. Sometimes I think we are too like in it to really see it, and we don't realize what Pluto does until retrospect. And recently, if you're a little bit more of like a film studies, like visual learner, there's a show called Station 11 on HBO Max that is based off of a book called Station 11. And it is an apocalyptic thriller. It's a little bit irking because there is like a pandemic that is involved in this this show, but it really does a really good job of showing like what would happen if like the government did collapse. And like what it really gets at is like getting back to our roots of community and how community support ultimately will save this planet. And like getting to know your neighbor is more important than anything. So I think a lot of the themes that you just discussed, Kate, are talked about in a more fictional way in that show. So if you are, again, if you're more a visual learner, you like to watch stuff, highly recommend Station 11, HBO Max.
I love it. Actually, one thing that I also want to mention before we move on from the topic of the Pluto return is the fact that, the Declaration of Independence was signed when Pluto was in Capricorn, but the Constitution was written and implemented when Pluto was in Aquarius. So, although 2022 is a very important year for the United States, I also have my eyes set on 2024 and beyond. Like 2024 to 2028 is also going to be an extremely important time for for the like actual laws and legislation and constitution in this country. That's my take, my little hot take. But
My intuition
again,
says that too, that once Pluto moves into Aquarius, it's gonna just continue this story.
absolutely. And I think this is the start of everything. And as we progress, well, actually, I think 2020 was the start of 2020 was really kind of the start with the Pluto Saturn conjunction. But anyway, now I'm kind of digressing. If you're interested in the astrology of 2020, listen to the first 3 episodes of this podcast where I go into that even more detailed. Here's your homework. Listen to the podcast with me and Mal, and then listen to the first podcast that I ever recorded. Just kidding. Yeah, but we're living through a very, very historical time, and the astrology supports that completely. I also want to say another hot take, and I don't know if I'm going to cut this from this episode or not, but I have to get it off my chest because I've been thinking about it nonstop. And Mal, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, but I kind of had this feeling, astrologically speaking, in 2020, all I could think was like, there's going to be another world war, essentially in 2020. I was like, what is the catastrophic event? What's the world war going to be? Because when we look back on 2020 was such a monumental year, for all of the reasons I outlined in the first and second episode of this podcast. And I kind of feel like if it weren't for the pandemic, Putin might have invaded Ukraine or pulled this shit a little sooner. How do you feel about that?
It's interesting. I don't think I can speak to my opinion on that specifically, but I will definitely say that I feel like a lot of political tension has almost been not necessarily like frozen, but almost
Yeah.
we can't deal with the fighting of these leaders of the countries right now because everybody's got COVID, so like
Right?
now that it's not to say COVID is over at all, we're still dealing with it, but there's something about also what has been able to go on underneath the table of all different
Yeah.
kinds of not only the United States government, but all different kinds of governments all over the world. I think there's a lot that maybe has gone under the table that like citizens haven't necessarily noticed that is now getting ready to be revealed. Like think of like a collective 7 of Swords if you're a tarot reader. I think that's kind of what is kind of brewing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because this has been brewing since before 2020. And I do feel like 2020 kind of like was like, wait, we can't escalate these global tensions to their fullest extent yet. So I think that, this year it's kind of like, okay, although yeah, exactly what we said. Although the pandemic isn't over, this is a year where the global tensions are spicy and mounting. And you can see that, like, especially with China too. Um, uh, I mean, we are living through very historical times when the United States is becoming more independent and self sufficient and basically preparing to not be overly dependent on dictatorial countries. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, I digress. Topic for another episode, perhaps, but I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah,
See what you
we'll
thought.
No, I find that all really fascinating. And I'm also wondering too, Kate, like when it comes to going into March's astrology, is there anything like,
Yes, let's dive into March's astrology.
yeah, when you think of like the overview of the month ahead, do you feel like March is unique in any way? Like, do you find that March is giving you some interesting vibes?
All right. So that's a great question. I think that as we head into March, this is when the themes of 2022 actually really arise in full force. Um, again, Jordan and I gave the astrology intensity rating for March a high of 4. Now, granted, it goes to very high, which we're not there yet. Very high is May, August, and November. But March is kind of when we get this kickoff. I feel like March in general is unique. Personally, I find March's uniqueness really comes from Mars square Uranus and a lot of the Saturn and Aquarius energy and their squares to Uranus. I think that March is going to be an important month for breakthrough energy. And kind of like what we were talking about before we started recording, actually, you said it lovely before we started recording that March is the month where we kind of get momentum to have these breakthroughs. And I feel like we can kind of sense that on a personal and a collective level. We're in Pisces season, and I think of Pisces season as like being in the belly before a rebirth of Aries energy. So I think that now is a time where we're really getting a lot of sparks flying. Especially another thing, the astrology of this month that baffles me is the second Venus Mars conjunction of at 0 degrees Aquarius. This month, I think on a collective level, really sparks are flying this month. This is an important month on a collective and personal level where there's so much going on and it may feel like it's all gestating underneath the surface and then really erupts to the surface and carries us into April with a ton of momentum. The astrology of 2022 is so juicy and so meaty. Like pretty much every month this year has a lot going on. And it's different than the astrology of January and February. So March is like this opening of this new chapter of a lot of themes of tectonic shifts, like tectonic radical shifts towards change and towards favoring community over the individual, whatever the cost that means. How do you feel about March? I'm sorry, I can't help myself. Really went on a spiel there. How are you feeling about March, Mel? What are your impressions of this month? How are you feeling into this energy in general?
Yeah. Well, I love your impressions, and I feel that too. I really feel that um that sort of subtle difference, yet
Mm-hmm.
there's also this, it's subtle yet profound energetic shift that's coming for us in March and in 2022 in general. This is not the same year, I think, as 2021. In a way, 2021 kind of felt like just like a repeat of 2020. And although we do have some challenges in 2022, we also have some paths forward that are presenting themselves to us in almost like a spiritual way. So I think there's something with that kind of coming opening in March. From like a student's perspective, I think about, if you look at just even the chart of March, most of the time, you know, most of our planets are hanging out in Aquarius and Pisces. So when we see a chart that's kind of clustered in Aquarius and Pisces, we're looking at the final signs of the zodiacal cycle. We're looking at Aquarius, the final fixed air sign, and the final fixed sign in general, is finishing up a project, has taken a project all the way to like its final stages. And Aquarius is about to hand off this project to Pisces, which is the final mutable sign of the zodiac. And what mutable signs do is they sort of they transform, and they almost like transcend what the fixed sign has done and bring it into a new frequency. So I think we're going to feel that, as cheesy as it sounds, we're going to feel that kind of um, we're jumping down like the rabbit hole kind of thing. Like that's what it feels like when it's there's so much Pisces energy. I've arrived at this rabbit hole. I don't know what's going to happen when I jump down, but this is the only thing in a weird way that I can feel aligned to do. So I'm just going to jump down it. So that's how I feel about March.
Absolutely. I also feel like March is the month where we're in Pisces season and Jupiter's in Pisces, and there's just a lot of that Piscean energy, as you said. Having a vision is going to be the most important tool we have in March. And it is going to be incredibly important all month to cultivate a vision for our lives and our experience. Or maybe that means like living the vision that you kind of have had in your mind, maybe cultivating a new one. But being able to see things before they actually manifest is going to be the tool that we have in our arsenal to help us build momentum and carry that momentum for 2022 in general. You know, when the vibe I get heavily for March also is creative inspiration that comes before the actual action. You know, it's that moment. March is this moment where we don't know what we're going to do with all of this creative vision or inspiration that we have, but it's an important month to allow it to flow to us and just trust that it is serving some type of purpose. You know, that's mutable energy. It's like, I don't know how all of these parts fit together yet, but I trust that they do, and I trust that they will at the right time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it reminds me that it's our conditioning to see an obstacle in front of us and try to figure it out, quote unquote, with our intellectual mind. But with so many planets in Pisces, you actually waste the Piscean energy when you're too fixated on like, I'm gonna figure this out and I'm gonna like get to the root of this, and you really over intellectualize things. Yeah, you're gonna miss out on the beautiful like nectar of the Piscean vibe, which is actually to like take a walk and daydream, and it's actually your daydream that shows you the way forward instead of the figuring it out.
And I will tell you, I feel that on such a personal level that when I feel stuck creatively, I will just go on a really long walk along the lake, and all of these ideas come up, and I'll jot them down and save them for later and then use them in a post or put them in my newsletter. And it's just that moment of freeing your mind and not focusing on being productive that actually is more supportive of what we consider to be productive. It's those moments when you release and you actually just make space for something else greater to come through you that I think is so Piscean in nature. That happens to me all the time, where I will just literally I go on a long walk next to Lake Michigan, and I'll come back with such a new, refreshing, and inspiring take, and my content will be better for it, and my readings will be better for it. And it's not that linear do this, get this, do this, get this. Like it's a much more organic process that I think March requires, which I actually think will be a little more difficult with so much Aquarius energy. Aquarius is that energy that wants to intellectualize and understand. So I think that there is a need this month to balance our intellect with our intuition and allow our intuition to win a little bit more than our intellect. If that makes sense.
I love it. Yes.
Yeah, totally. Some quick tips from the 2022 Cosmic Guide. So Jordan and I wrote some quick tips for everybody. I'm going to read them for March. So quick tips for March also before we dive into week to week. Be a warrior for the greater good is something that we kind of decided would be a great theme with all the Aquarius energy going on. And what happens when you rub two rocks together? Sparks. That's something that kind of resonates with the Venus-Mars conjunction in Aquarius. And this is a month again to do things differently and to go with the flow a little bit more. And also moving boldly into the future. I think what you said, like the zodiac, Pisces and Aquarius are the last two signs of the zodiac. So there's this element of breaking down, but also moving boldly into new territory that I think is 2022. It's this new landscape. It's this new normal that we're all becoming comfortable with and starting to really embody in March and really fully in April too.
I love that, especially the move boldly into the future. And I think the Pisces new moon that we kind of start the month out with is very like move boldly into the future kind of new moon.
Absolutely. So with that, let's talk about the first week of March. And this is going to go from about February 28th to March 6th. This month starts with this very interesting new moon in Pisces on March 2nd. Mal, what are your thoughts about this new moon in Pisces? It's very interesting.
Well, it's actually kind of a lot to put together as even as an astrologer, I look at this new moon and it's very conjunction heavy. What does that mean in English? Well, new moons are inherently a conjunction, and a conjunction means that both planets, two or more planets are hanging out at the same degree. So when we have a new moon, the sun and the moon are coming together at the same degree, aka conjunct. So we have that, Pisces sun, Pisces moon conjunct at 12 degrees Pisces, forming the new moon. But yet, that new moon is also hanging out with Jupiter. So we could say Jupiter is conjunct this new moon as well. Then, wait, there's more. Mercury and Saturn are over in Aquarius at the same degree. But wait, there's more. And then we scoot over to Capricorn, and Mars, Venus, and Pluto are all hanging out in the same degree. So there's a total of like 3 pretty significant conjunctions happening on the day of this new moon. So, I think we could even tap into the meaning of the conjunction. For me, it's kind of like a synthesis. It's like the planets come together and form a soup. They form an entirely new planet. They're no longer 2 individuals, they become one. Particularly, I'm thinking about that Mercury-Saturn conjunction. Sometimes when Mercury and Saturn get together, we have some self-doubt or we have some fear. Yet, there's this huge visionary thing that's happening with that Pisces conjunction, the new moon. And then there's this huge, like, I'm moving forward with that Mars, Pluto, Venus conjunction in Capricorn. So it's like our fears, our desire to move forward, and our vision are getting added into this soup. And I don't know if I hope that made sense, because it made sense in my mind, but yeah, there's something
Well,
there.
when I think Pisces, I always think soup. I always think Pisces soup. That's like the perfect way to put it. It's
Yeah.
a Pisces soup. It's a Pisces conjunction soup.
Mm-hmm. It's like a Pisces soup with like Aquarius and Capricorn ingredients that make it like spicy.
Right? Also, it's worth mentioning that this is kind of what the chart looks like for anybody out there who's watching this on Mal's YouTube channel. But this, oh, nice.
I'm just going to pull it up.
I love it. Let's pull up the chart. So if you're watching this on Mal's YouTube channel, which is linked in the show notes as well, we're pulling up the new moon charts. The thing that strikes me about this new moon, you're right, it's so conjunction heavy, but it's in the signs Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So there's something about the energy of this where we are kind of again dedicated, like thinking about something that is larger than ourselves. You know, these are the transpersonal planets, the transpersonal signs, the signs that look outward to the collective and to the future. There's something that about this new moon that any intentions that you are setting are meant to serve a greater purpose beyond yourself, beyond just your personal development, beyond your ego. Your goals, your potential in this new moon is meant to think about something greater than yourself, something that's even societal, maybe something that has to do with your legacy, something that has to do with your place in the world. This is the new moon to dream and to cultivate that vision about something that hasn't even been seen before, that might be completely new and undefined almost. You know, there is this energy to this new moon that is also wonderful for dream work. Please, on this new moon, make a note to write down your dreams and to analyze what comes through when you are in your dream state. And just some quick tips to do that. Write down how your dreams made you feel. Write down who was present in your dreams and describe your relationship with that person or with that place. It's kind of unpack more meaning of what the universe is really trying to communicate to you about your own experience. The other thing that I love about this new moon is the fact that Uranus is going to be in a sextile with this energy, with this new moon and with Uranus. With a sextile, that brings breakthroughs if we take the first step. Trines generally bring free flowing energy that we don't necessarily have to work for. It comes to us naturally. It can be subjectively positive or negative, but it's just free flowing energy. Sextiles require us to take a first step, and then that energy is reciprocated. So with this new moon, having the willingness to take the first steps towards your grand ambitions and towards your dreams is fundamental. This is also such an important new moon to honestly vision boarding. And I know that vision boarding can for some people it works so well, but I also want to challenge the traditional idea of vision boarding, of like cutting shit out of magazines and putting it on a big poster board. It's not necessarily what we have to do for visioning boarding. You can have a digital vision board. I have digital vision boards in my phone all the time. I have folders in my I have folders on Instagram, and I have folders on my iCloud where I'm always like taking snapshots of things and cultivating that in my life. Like, the power of images cannot be underestimated during this new moon, and really cultivating those vivid images for your life and for what you are trying to call in, that serves like a much greater purpose than just for your own like ego or for yourself or for your development. Like, that's great if you want to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and if you want to set the intentions to grow X, Y, and Z. This is a great new moon to do that and to set those intentions, but also keep in mind of what the greater goal is and a greater mission that you're trying to serve. In a way, this new moon is selfless, and in setting intentions for ourselves, we are meant to be connecting with spirit or with a greater cause. If you're not as spiritually inclined, this can manifest in taking up a vision for a life, for a purpose, for something that is just bigger than you, and your personal development serves that. It's a synthesis, it's a co-creation that's happening during this new moon with the universe. I really like this new moon. I really do. I really liked the Aquarius new moon in February, and I really like this new moon in March. Like, I think that we're getting started with some really wonderful lunations in 2022. The new moon in April also is going to be very interesting as well. So stay tuned for that podcast. But the new moons really to start this year are very, very, very potent times to sow seeds and to cultivate a really broad, delicious vision for our life in 2022. So take advantage of that. Take a moment during this new moon to take a step back and to really cultivate that vision, to get that vision board down. Take a moment for yourself, spend time in water, really like taking a bath, taking a cleansing shower. And when you do, imagine all of the stale, stagnant, stressed energy being released through your feet and going down the drain, things like that. Those are all wonderful ritual ideas for this new moon. I feel like I talked a lot about it. I'm very excited about this new moon, actually. It's very, very potent astrology.
No, I loved it. You're giving me a bunch of ideas. I haven't updated my vision board in a while, so that feels like it's on my to-do list. And I can't think of a better time to work with the water element in our magical practices too. So yeah, go crazy. Like, take those
Yeah.
ritualistic showers, baths, visit your favorite water source in nature, whether you live by a lake, stream, or ocean, and really soak up like the medicinal energy of that water source. I think it's in the stars.
Absolutely. Oh, so much to unpack with this new moon. It's a great start to the month, but also the day after this full moon on the 3rd, on March 3rd, is another very important astrological event. Mars and Venus will come together with Pluto in the sky. Now, what's interesting about this astrology is that the Mars and Venus won't be exactly conjunct together, although they'll be at the same degree. They won't come together by the same arc minute until that Sunday. But this is still a very important time and important astrology, because Mars and Venus are going to be coming together with Pluto again, for the last time, I guess, not the last time, but this is kind of a final culmination of a lot of the astrology that has been such a hallmark for the transition from 2021 to 2022. This is also the same day that Venus will no longer be in its shadow. Venus will be clear its shadow from the retrograde cycle, and we're finally able to move forward. So there is this moment, I feel like, on the very beginning of March, where the transitional energy from 2021 to 2022 is behind us, and we're able to really move forward with so much depth and penetrating insight. Mel, what are your thoughts about this Venus Mars conjunction on the 3rd of March, on Thursday?
Your word culminate feels really resonant to me because, like you said, the Venus started her retrograde cycle back in what, November, with
November.
with a conjunction to Pluto. So this is like we're seeing like some kind of final chapter of a story here, especially when it comes to maybe the houses in your own chart that Venus rules. So don't only pay attention to your Capricorn house, but I'm thinking also your house that is Taurus and Libra, thinking about maybe the stories that are finishing up in those houses as well. But I like to think that like the third pass of a like conjunction especially is that kind of climactic sort of wrapping up energy. However, one thing I will say is with the political climate that we kind of previously discussed with the Pluto return of the United States, I do, not to get too paranoid, but I do think about Mars and Pluto being war planets coming into a conjunction. Venus is there, but she's struggling a bit because she's ruled by Saturn. So, Saturn kind of has her in his grips. So, I'm actually not sure how much Venus we're particularly going to feel on March 3rd. I think that like pushing forward, moving forward momentum of Mars and Pluto, even sometimes being explosive, can be interesting. You know what's coming to mind? It's like the season finale of like a dramatic TV show, like Pretty Little Liars. Like, the ending of that, any season, why do I think of Pretty Little Liars, or Euphoria or something, like what's something everybody's watching, again, you're always going to end, there's something wrapping up, but then that wrapping up point also is extreme and it keeps you wanting more. So that might be kind of the type of culmination we're talking about with this conjunction.
Totally. I also think it's worth mentioning that the last time Mars was in Capricorn and came together with Pluto, that's when the pandemic hit, essentially. And that's when everybody went into lockdown. So they're on a collective level. This is intense. This is going to bring up, I think this is when a lot of the world tensions are really going to start to escalate to an alarming level. And that's not to say, that's not to tell anybody to panic. Actually, in fact, that might even be more of a helpful message to understand that we can expect global political tensions to rise during this first week of March, but it will pass. Things come and go, and it all comes and goes. So take it, with a little grain of salt. And I think that this will certainly bring up a lot on a collective level. Also on a personal level, I think that this is an important moment to decide what we are what you're ready to commit to in 2022. I think there might have been a lot up in the air during the transition of November, December, January, February, might have had a lot of transitional energy. Maybe there's been a lot up in the air for you. Now, this is a time to commit and bring in those Capricornian elements of, all right, I understand what I am meant to be building. And I have a depth of understanding now much greater than I did back in November and December. And I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to commit.
Yeah, I would say I would not be surprised to hear if people are making really big decisions to move forward. I would say last week of February and first 2 weeks of March, if not the whole month of March, but I think especially that last week of February, first week of March, it feels like I'm making a decision. I'm finally reached enough clarity to do this. And the thing that is coming to mind, one more thing on this transit on a personal level, something that I've been finding a little bit of comfort in is thinking like, you don't have to be 100% sure to say, in order to say yes. Like you really only have to be like, I don't know, 70% sure, 80% sure. So I've been
Yeah.
like thinking about that with some of the tougher decisions that I've been faced with in the past couple years. I've kind of realized I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm ever going to be 100% sure. But right now I'm at like a solid like 83% sure. And I'm just going to take it and make the decision based off of this 83%, accepting that like the 100% isn't coming. That feels like kind of like a Mars Pluto thing.
I think that's wonderful advice. That is excellent advice, I think, for the start of March. Um, let's talk about the first weekend of March, the 5th and the 6th, that Saturday and Sunday, because the first weekend of March also has a lot of very, very intense and important astrology. On that Saturday, March 5th, the sun will be conjunct Jupiter in the sky. It'll be, a cazimi essentially. And when any planet comes together with the sun, it's called a cazimi, and it represents like a burning off or a type of clarification of the topic of those planets. So there's something I'm feeling into for this weekend, especially on that Saturday, where we're kind of getting clarity of vision, clarity of our dreams, goals, and ambitions that we might have kind of set or started during the new moon on a couple of days prior. But I think that this is an important time, especially on Friday and Saturday, to pay attention to like what about your vision is becoming more clear or more obvious. This is, I think, when we're really going to feel the juice of Jupiter and Pisces. And really, I think also it's important to be open to receiving gifts and receiving praise, receiving the benefic juiciness that Jupiter has to offer. And then the next day on that Sunday, Venus and Mars change signs. And not to get too ahead, but like this weekend, the weekend is just a big weekend of like visceral shifts. I think that first weekend of March is like, oh wow, we're really in 2022 now. What are you feeling into for that weekend, Mal, for the Jupiter for this Jupiter Sun conjunction, or even for the Venus Mars conjunction in Aquarius?
Yeah, well, something I'm thinking about is that, Jupiter up until this point is kind of under the beams of the sun. And something that the ancient astrologers talked about was as a planet is kind of leading up to the Kazimi or the conjunction with the sun, sometimes those beams of the sun almost like blind the planet and almost hide it. So I'm thinking about like when it comes to clarity and realizations with a Sun Jupiter conjunction, I think something about Jupiter might be becoming like more public and less secretive. It's not to say that like personal secrets, your life is coming to the surface, but I think there's something being revealed here, something that's being seen more clearly. And I was thinking also on a collective scale, in more like mundane astrology, Jupiter represents our judicial system, our political systems, even our like religious systems. So I would not be surprised if this weekend there was something maybe revealed that we weren't seeing about those kind of larger scale systems. And maybe that Mars Venus conjunction that comes the day after, it's almost like the reaction to the clarity. Um,
Mm.
it's the okay, I have clarity now. Um, how do we somehow agree to disagree and move forward? Because that's kind of what Mars and Venus have been doing this whole time, and their conjunction in Capricorn, conjunction in Aquarius. It's been like, can we agree to disagree? Can we find a way through this conflict, even though we both see it differently? And yeah, there's something being decided about how we're navigating this potential obstacle that comes from clarity.
Mm. I love that. I love that. I also get with this weekend like a lot of sparks of inspiration for the future, and I think that we are living through extremely divisive times, especially 2021. When we were doing this, 2021 was really marked by the Saturn Uranus square, which was present during the Civil War. Saturn and Uranus were squaring each other during the Civil War. So there is this element of division and of conflicting visions for the future. And I think that this weekend, on a collective level, and maybe if this applies to your personal level, take that and run with it too. But this is going to be a time where, especially in March, where there are two very stark conflicting visions for the future that come forward. And it is going to be a process that will play out all year. But I think now, in the beginning of March, especially this first weekend, is an important time to really consider what is best for the collective good, and understanding on a personal level, also understanding our role in that, and like really considering, what is my role? How do I contribute to something greater than myself, to a greater vision, and kind of taking any creative sparks or any visions again from this weekend and saving them and holding those with you close to your heart for the rest of 2022, because I do think that this is going to be an important year to hold that vision, and hold those values close to us, because it's going to get very rocky. The terrain might seem very picturesque during this Pisces season, but there are rocks and there are forks in the road that are going to be kind of difficult to navigate throughout this year. But I think that throughout it all, it is incredibly important to hold a vision in our hearts that is different than what's come before us, and that favors what is best for everybody, instead of just the few, you know, the elites, the 1%. This is a time where we have to consider what is in the best interest for the collective at large.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
I couldn't agree more. That really resonates with me.
Yeah. And I think that this, because Venus and Mars are coming together at the same degree as Jupiter and Saturn did, for the Great Conjunction in 2021, you know, this is going to bring forward a lot of similar themes that kind of were simmering in 2021. And, you know, on a collective level, I think a lot about the resistance to change, and how that, although 2022's astrology is very different from the astrology of 2021, there will still certainly be a lot of resistance to change, you know, which we've seen through a lot. I think in 2021, seen a lot through like the suppression of voting rights legislations, you know, anti-trans and anti-LGBTQIA legislation. Like there's a lot of resistance to change, but I think that this weekend it's very important to cultivate that vision and hold that vision very close, of what's best for everybody. Sorry if I'm rambling there. I don't know. I just wanted to make sure I hit all of the
No,
notes
I
in my
like it.
mind.
Something that Mitch Horowitz, the writer, says in his book, Miracle Habits, is, commit to a vision and make it into almost like a talisman, something that you carry around all the time that you can look at, and let that like lead you throughout your day and see how your manifestations kind of come to fruition in more powerful ways when you are being reminded of your vision, in like some sort of like little thing that you made.
I love that. That's perfect. That meshes perfectly. Um, perfectly. And I think that this is kind of a moment where we're almost turning the corner a little bit in 2022. And then we enter into the second week of March from the 7th to the 13th with different energy. The story for the week, what I'm really, the major astrology of the second week is certainly Mercury moving into Pisces. Mercury's kind of been waffling through Capricorn and Aquarius for a couple months now. So Mercury moving into Pisces is certainly going to usher in a very different tone, some different energy to our experience as well. What are your thoughts about Mercury and Pisces, Mel? As a very Piscean individual yourself, how are you feeling into this Mercury and Pisces for March?
Well, here's the thing. So, Mercury in Pisces is a Mercury placement where, Mercury is opposite to one of its stronger signs, which is Virgo. And why is Mercury really strong in Virgo? Well, Mercury can get everything it wants to get done in Virgo. It can, communicate really directly. It can organize. It can exchange goods and services. That's something that perhaps we forget about, that Mercury represents, is commerce and like the exchange of money, the exchange of like words and communication. Think of the marketplace that is Mercury. So that is why sometimes it's difficult and ironic that tax season, at least in America, usually correlates with Mercury and Pisces, because it's like the biggest time of like commerce and trying to get our ducks in a row and trying to sort out our spreadsheets and our receipts and stuff like that. And it all happens under Mercury and Pisces, where Mercury is a bit debilitated. But on the other hand, I don't think Mercury and Pisces is necessarily bad for communication. I think it's not necessarily the greatest energy to feel motivated to organize your file cabinet. But wow, like, do I know some powerful Mercury and Pisces natives who are prolific writers, prolific artists, who see the world in almost like watercolor, and they're able to expand the bounds of our language. So I think there's like this very like, there's almost like linguistic artistry that presents itself in the second week of March. So if you're a writer who's been feeling blocked, I would say definitely, I think the unblocking is going to happen in March. So start back up, go into your writers group or whatever. Feels like new inspiration is coming. One more thing I will say, that Mercury is, again, related to commerce, not doing so well in Pisces. And then Venus is related to money. And Venus at this point is sandwiched between Mars and Saturn. So in like a more like in ancient astrology, we would have called this like enclosure by malefics, when a planet is sandwiched between Saturn and Mars. Planet of money, not doing so hot. Planet of commerce, not doing so hot. I think that it would be a great month to perhaps participate in a no spend March. Like in a sort of let's limit spending. If the planet of money and the planet of commerce aren't working for me, then let me pull back, not in a scarcity mindset kind of way, but it might just be, I don't know, something that was coming to me. Like it might not be a good month to make hasty purchases to blow all your money on X, Y, and Z. Might be a better like saving kind of reorganization of the finances kind of week.
I love that idea. Also, it's like, or just like a monetary diet almost. I mean, I'm anti-diet culture, but it's the thing that come into my mind. But about, you know, I really love that take, Mel, especially specifically Mercury is going to be in Pisces from the 9th to the 27th. So like these middle of March, it could be a really time to even like re-examine, how do I spend my money, and also focusing less on spending money on things that bring you monetary value, and like focus on how you spend your time instead, to bring you joy and enrichment, almost. I love that. I really like that take. I'm gonna do that. I'm doing that.
I'm glad to hear that, Kate. And I'm reminded too about I forget who talks about this. It might be like I think there's an Instagram account called The Financial Diet, or something along those lines. And it's like a big Instagram platform. But something they talked about was the concept of like, I think they call it fantasy spending, which is like buying for your fantasy life instead of who you actually are. A good example of this in my life is that I probably wear a swimsuit once a year max, yet I'll see some kind of swimsuit sale and I'll buy like 4 or 5. Like for some reason, those are my kryptonite. And I'm like, I'm literally buying for this like vision of me. I'm like going on the beach in Maui and like looking under the stars. And I'm like, bitch, you're not going to Maui. Like you're not like anytime soon. Like, I don't know what kind of sugar daddy you think you have, but you don't have a plane ticket to Maui. So why are you buying these swimsuits? The beach you're going to is like Indiana, and there's like a warning that the water's not like the water's dangerous.
And you're not supposed to swim.
Yeah. So I don't know why
not in Indiana.
Right. I don't know why you're buying swimsuits. So that kind of feels like a theme could come up with all the Piscean energy. Being stuck in fantasies can be beneficial, just not when you're living your life in a way that isn't based off of reality, especially when it comes to financial stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'm doing it. Everybody out there listening, let us know if you do this and how it works. um, I also I'm actually a big fan of this Mercury and Pisces transit. One thing that I will say, Mercury is technically in detriment here, but being in detriment does not have to be detrimental at all. All it means is that you are operating in ways that don't necessarily conform to how our society is structured and how, and what is normalized. Mercury's not being poorly treated during this transit. In fact, it's actually making some very interesting kismet little kisses to all of the other planets. It's not in a terrible state. It's actually a wonderful time for creative thinking. The one note that I wrote down for this transit, a tip that I'm really going to do and stick into, that I would suggest any listeners do as well, is to schedule unstructured time on purpose. Really schedule and like block out an hour to maybe even an entire day. Maybe that will be your Wednesday, Mercury's day, or during Mercury hours. Schedule unstructured time, really where you just let your mind go, and maybe you just like get high and do whatever you want to do, or enjoy the lack of structure and the creative juice that can offer you especially for this transit for the beginning of March. One thing that really kind of resonated with me, I forget where I heard this phrase and the saying before, but it was about creativity and about how creativity is kind of like a tap of water that you turn on and off, and how you have to let it flow a little bit before it becomes clear. And I really feel that with Mercury and Pisces, like you were saying, with anybody who's like a writer who might be struggling with coming up with creative ideas. Mercury doesn't necessarily always have to be writing either. It's any type of channel or communication. Schedule that unstructured time to allow the dirty water to run a little bit, and then it will become clear. And don't put too much pressure on yourself and put value judgments on what comes out of this unstructured time yet. Do that in April. Save that for April. But this is an important month to kind of let all of that juice really start to flow. And just keep in mind that it might be a little muddy before it becomes clear. But when it becomes clear, it's going to be very, very delicious. And it's really going to set the tone for a transcendental month we have coming up in April, which we'll talk about next month, but very important time.
I agree, Kate. And I think that's the perfect like little um flow into the transit that finishes up the week two, which is the sun conjuncts Neptune and
Yes.
sextiles the nodes on the 13th and 14th, because during a sun Neptune conjunction, I really think the only way to work with that is like unstructured time. Uh,
Absolutely.
because here's the thing, like if we try to structure ourselves too much when we are heavily influenced by like Neptunian vibes, we sometimes might not make as much progress as we think we're making. We might be acting on illusion. This is the type of thing like,
Or just get terrible anxiety. Like,
yeah, giving yourself anxiety. Yeah, like spirit is actually showing me this interesting image of like someone trying to build something during Sun Neptune, and like their boss or whatever is like, yeah, go build this on like the southwest corner of this yard or whatever. And they end up building it on the completely wrong corner. So they did the work, but it's not in the right place. And that's the kind of thing that happens, I think, especially when Mercury's in Pisces, when the sun is conjunct Neptune. There's miscommunication. So it might just be better to, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially that weekend of the 12th and the 13th, folks out there listening, take a chill pill, take it easy, you know, take a little vacation. Unstructured time is the way to go. Don't build something on the wrong corner that weekend. That's the way to go. Oh, what a Pisces season. So let's dive into the third week of March, from roughly March 14th to the 20th. So this week, we have, the beginning of the week is pretty astrologically chill, to be honest. But the weekend has some pretty important astrology. Specifically, on Friday, March 18th, we get a Virgo full moon. And if you're watching the YouTube version, we've got a chart up here for you, the Virgo full moon. Here we have this Virgo full moon. Mal, would you like to kick off this Virgo full moon, since you did such a beautiful job with the Pisces new moon? What are your initial thoughts of this Virgo full moon?
Well, it is, it's interesting that the moon in Virgo is continuing to answer to that Mercury in Pisces. So I think this Virgo full moon very much has that Mercury in Pisces, like creative, artistic, nebulous sort of vibe. When it comes to the full moons releasing something or like purging something, I'm not sure if I quite get that vibe from this full moon. I feel like it's maybe more about investing in your own creative vision a little bit more. Maybe we're purging the fear of investing in ourselves creatively, something like that. I'm thinking that because going back to Venus kind of being sandwiched between Mars and Saturn, Venus is our self-worth. So like there's something about our self-worth fighting with our vision. So
Mm-hmm.
like if you imagine yourself to want to be president one day, but then, and you can see that vision, but then your self-worth says, oh, well, I could never do that. Well, then, yes, that will be the story because you've already decided what you can and cannot do. So something that I'm thinking about too is like the power of the universe, the power of God, and the sort of ways humans might put limits on God's power or the universe's power by telling ourselves, like, oh, I could never do that. That's not possible. That would never manifest. How do you know? Are you the universe? No, you're not. So there's something here about like, how do you know that couldn't happen? That's how I feel it looking at this full moon, Kate. What are you picking up on?
Man, I think that every Virgo full moon in Pisces season is like this brief moment of aha clarity in the middle of a muddy swamp. You know, this is kind of when the lotus blooms in the middle of this soup. This is like when some part of the soup makes sense, when we get an aha moment or that realization or a reveal. It's a moment of piercing clarity within the fog. That's the Virgo-y elements to all of this. This Virgo full moon is really a time also to understand the small steps that we need to take in order to accomplish our vision. But also, I think it's very important to understand that precision comes with practice. And although we might not have like this skill, like if we have this vision for our life that is so important, especially in March and April, we might just like not be where we need to be yet to kind of accomplish, kind of go off what you were saying. We might just not have the skill set yet. We might not be there yet. But that doesn't mean that we can't consistently practice. So I think that this is a moment of understanding the concrete steps that need to be accomplished, or the practice that really feels juicy and nourishing and good to us. There's power in the practice, essentially. The full moon will be in a trine with Pluto. So there is this element of cultivating a very powerful practice that can match the power of our vision that I get with this full moon for sure. That's my take on this full moon. So I feel like if there is like a ritualistic activity to do, it is to tap into the activities that you do every single day that feel really good. And maybe although unstructured time is very important during this could be a time maybe to write out the daily rituals that feel juicy and supportive to you, and literally commit to doing them every day if you can. Or like, what rituals feel juicy and good and fulfilling to do every day? Does it feel really juicy and good to go on a long walk every day, or to say a prayer every morning? It's just, even if it's just 3 minutes of doing something consistently every day when you wake up or when you go to bed, now is the time to do that. This is the time to get clarity on what feels good and what feels right to you. And even though, it's a small step, the small steps are the things that lead to really big dramatic results.
I love it. Yeah. And, not only is this full moon trining Pluto, but it's also trining the nodes too. So whenever like nodes and Pluto are involved, I'm thinking like there's something bigger than just this lifetime happening. There's something about like our soul's path or our like karmic, you know, weight that our souls carry. And there's something about what did we come to this incarnation to learn and do, and what fears did we come here to overcome. So yeah, it does feel like there's a little bit of like this karmic Pluto nodal flair to the full moon. So I like the idea of partnering that with something about spiritual discipline.
Yeah, absolute spiritual discipline. Perfect way to put it. Perfect way to put it. So that's a great take. I love that take on this Virgo full moon. Let's talk about the next major event we have, which is Aries season and the spring equinox. So we have Aries season and the spring equinox happening on that after that weekend, on the 20th. Now you're the witch church, our witch church guru and guide, Mal, and I would love just to hear your take on the spring equinox. Astra,
Star.
Ostara. I just always fumble the pronunciation of our sabbats or sabbats. I can't even. I feel like I read about it so much that I have the pronunciation in my head, but sometimes I don't. My pronunciation in my head doesn't align with how it's actually pronounced. But you're our resident witch in chief. What are your thoughts on Aries season and the spring equinox?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And oftentimes, like when it comes to celebrating like the equinoxes, the witch holidays, I feel like I am a little bit confused about where to look because I'm not so much a traditional, like, you know, stick to the witch's cookbook kind of witch here, but I do really value this book by Raven Caldera, and it's called Pagan Astrology. And I'll actually read a little bit of a snippet of what they say about Ostara because I think that the things that they point out, I just feel like they say it better than I could. So um, I'll just read this really small paragraph by Raven Caldera. The spring equinox was referred to as Ostara by the Celts and Ostara by the Saxons after the goddess of spring. It is a time when the winter um, is ending and the new growth is springing up. And astrologically, it is the time of changing from Pisces to Aries. The 12 signs of the zodiac have often been associated with the stages of life from infancy to adolescence. At the last and most passive stage, Pisces rules the advanced part of our old age. We tend to ignore this stage of our life in our culture or pretend like it will never happen to us. But the universe points out with the stark bleakness in the astrological life stages. It is followed again by Aries, the sign of infancy, showing the circular motion of souls as they reincarnate. Death follows life and rebirth follows death in this worldview, turning into a never ending cycle. So, this is kind of, for me, it's a time when we're maybe seeing how, nature really does reflect back to us different parts of our own lives. And as we see like the budding of the spring, and we see like the first little flowers or the first little sprouts of the things that we have been planting, they might actually come up during this time. But I think also it's a good time to remember that as new manifestations bloom, a new version of yourself is also coming up with this new manifestation. So it's almost like your version of yourself, your new version of yourself, and your manifestation that's slowly coming up out of the ground are like meeting each other. And you're like, how does the new version of me continue to grow what is coming up through the soil? So I really like the metaphor of like the sprout coming up through the soil for Ostara.
Oh, me too. You always have the best like books. Your ninth house totally comes out every podcast. You're like, I have a book, I have a resource, I have a guru that I've learned from. Let me quote Jane Eyre.
Oh, probably, yeah.
I love talking to you about astrology because of that. It's fantastic. I really don't even have anything else to add. The one thing I would add about this, not Ostara, that's beautiful description, but just about this Aries season in general. I think this Aries season is going to be so powerful in continuing the cultivation of our vision that we set on the Pisces new moon on March 2nd, because this Aries season, Jupiter and Neptune will be coming together in the sky, which is another podcast episode to dive into on its own. But this Aries season in general will, I think, be extremely powerful and transcendental on both a personal and a collective level. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And one thing, not to get ahead of the year, but and not even to get ahead of the Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces, but something I'm thinking about with this Aries season is that Jupiter eventually mid-May will scoot into Aries for a little bit of a time. So do note that Jupiter's going to be going over whatever is happening in Aries season now. Like, and that's the perfect like metaphor for Aries season, bringing up these sprouts of our manifestations. And then by the time we get around to like early summer, Jupiter will be kind of expanding those sprouts in Aries. So yeah, that's something that I'm kind of excited about for this year as well.
Absolutely. So let's move on the to week 4 of March. So this week we've got a couple important shifts. First and foremost, Mars will be square Uranus on the 22nd. And anytime Mars is in an important or powerful aspect to any of the outer planets, I always find personally and collectively, it's very energetically catalytic, powerful, and potent. The last time that we had Mars in a square with Uranus was, I believe, in late October, November, which was a pretty potent, powerful time in, I mean, in my life personally, and also I think globally as well. But the last time I remember we talked about this on the podcast, you had a beautiful take on this where you talked about how this is such an important time to like examine our resistance and like our internal and external resistance. And I just love that. It stuck with me until now. And I think that that still resonates. I think that this Mars square Uranus is a time to examine our resistance to change, but also to kind of like overcome and like jump over those hurdles. What are your thoughts again on this specific Mars square Uranus with Mars in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus?
It's funny, I forgot I said that about resistance, but as of this moment of this recording, I feel like I have been sinking into like, oh, where am I resistant? So maybe this is sort of like a theme of March in general. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have these new ideas, but do we have the guts to take action? So I think there's something here about the Mars square Uranus. Maybe we're finally taking the step in the direction that we want to be going. Of course, there's a little bit of like that shadow side when Mars squares Uranus, especially in fixed signs. Actually, in a fixed sign, maybe it's not going to be as explosive or intense as if it was in like a cardinal sign, let's say. But still, I'm thinking about anger for some reason and the sort of transmutation of what we do with our anger and even frustration and irritation. So, Mars squared Uranus can be a little bit of a reactive time. So, I would maybe, watch who you are reacting to. And something that comes to mind is there's so many ideas, there's so many visionary opportunities in March. Yeah, what if you share one of those visions with someone that you love and they like shit on it and they're like, oh, that's not gonna work out, and you're like mad at them now. You're like, what the heck, you're not on my team, like you're not gonna cheerlead me. Like that's kind of what comes to mind with this Mars square Uranus, how maybe our visions start to come in conflict with other people's lack of like visionary ability,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I also think that Uranus and Taurus is the energy of 2022. Uranus and Taurus is going to be involved in all of these eclipses, and that Uranian energy is really one of the hallmark energies of the astrology of this year. So this is when Mars will be squaring it. And then in August, on August 1st, Mars, the North Node, and Uranus will all be conjunct in Taurus. So, with this Mars Uranus square, it is so important to understand the changes that 2022 is asking of us and learning how to push through those hurdles and learning how to have resilience during this very, very tumultuous process of structural tectonic changes and shifts that 2022 is asking us. And that resistance and these themes this last week of March are going to be really important to pay attention to, because that will come back around at the end of July and August, in my opinion. So whatever is brewing now, pay attention, or brewing at the end of March, pay attention to where you're feeling called to move towards and to change, because that's going to continue throughout the year, and it's really going to culminate in August, in my opinion.
Good point. I almost forgot about that. August 1st, Mars Uranus conjunction in Taurus. So that would make this squared like a third quarter square.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how we can kind of apply like the phases to the planets. And a third quarter square is usually, like you said, like I'm kind of like pushing through like the last situation that is holding me back, or I'm like sorting out what it is that I've been through the obstacles, I've done something to push through, but now I'm really like at a point where I'm like kind of getting there. I guess a good example of that would be like a third quarter square, in the sense of like I put my house for sale at the first quarter square, I sold it at the opposition, and now it's the third quarter square, and I have to figure out how to pack up all my shit and like get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
Yeah,
kind of the feeling of a third quarter square.
totally. Absolutely.
And then Mercury moves into
And then
Aries.
Mercury moves into Aries. And this is, I feel like this is the final like boom energy to note for the month of March. This is when our shopping, or our spending diet ends.
Yeah, me. Yeah, here's where you can start buying.
You
Go
can start
go
buying.
back to Target, go back to TJ Maxx. You're set.
Also, right? And also the day after that happens, Venus will be conjunct Saturn. So it's like, okay, what are you like ready to commit to spending, you know? But I think that in general, this Mercury in Aries is, I mean, this is also the same day. This is the same day that Neptune sextiles the North Node, and Neptune trines the South Node, and Mercury moves into Aries. So we're in Aries season. Mercury's moving into Aries season. This is really going to help, I guess, clarify our thoughts and understand how to direct our creativity. Like, that's the energy of that shift from Pisces to Aries. It's like, okay, how do I take this and shoot it in one direction? And I think that's the energy that I really get with this Mercury moving into Aries. It's a really important time to help kind of clarify our thoughts, to almost take action on whatever it is has been brewing and stewing a lot this month. And if things have been foggy, I think this is a very helpful change in perspective. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on the Mercury and Aries shift, and I guess the last week of March in general?
Yeah, I mean, I like it a lot. I think about Aries, Mercury and Aries, also next to the sun in Aries, which is the sun is exalted in Aries. So it's almost like our sense of individuality kind of returns after Piscean soup. We're able to get a clear focus about like that, those key words of Aries, which is I am. So we can say like I am a professional astrologer or whatever. I am an artist. I am a writer, with a little bit more confidence. And plus, I'm really looking forward to March 29th, because like you said, that's the day of the Venus Saturn conjunction. And I do like when Venus Saturn get together, especially this month, because that also marks when Venus escapes her sandwich, but hanging out in between Mars and Saturn the whole month, finally the 29th. she says high five to Saturn and then leaves that sandwich. So we could say that Venus almost regains her strength by the end of the month, and thus maybe we regain some strength when it comes to what we're capable of doing, and how we relate to like our personal identity and our personal stories.
Absolutely. And with that, I think that we've wrapped up the month of March. April, please come back. If you're still listening to this podcast, you've got to come back for the April forecast. April is a doozy of astrology. I believe we gave the April rating. The April intensity is also high, with a 4.5 rating as opposed to the 4 rating of March. April's a lot. We enter into eclipse season. We have a Jupiter Neptune conjunction. We've got 3 lunations that month. We've got a lot to talk about. So we'll see you in April for sure. So with that, Mal, do you have any final reflections, any personal announcements, or anything you'd like to share with everybody listening?
I'll just kind of shout out my Patreon, which you can find in the link in my bio on my Instagram, or it's just patreon.com/Mallory Hasty. There, I do offer a few different monthly readings. So if you're interested in getting a monthly tarot, monthly astrology, or monthly Reiki session from me, I offer those there at a discounted rate. And I have a little cluster of clients who do step into my office virtually every month, and it's been kind of cool, like to visit people once a month, see how they're doing. It's a little bit of a way to commit to your own growth and self-care, so check those out. And also, if you are interested in learning tarot with me, I've got some tarot classes about to be released. So definitely check that out on my Instagram and my website as well if you're looking to learn tarot, which is my other passion, besides astrology, in addition to astrology.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It's always a pleasure having you on here, Mal. It's just wonderful.
Yes.
For anyone out there who's heard me talk about the 2022 Cosmic Guide, that's also going to be one of my shameless plugs to add on here. If you want more information about how to navigate the astrology of 2022, check it out. It's linked in the show notes as well. And if you use the code POD, you can get 10% off any of my workshops digitally for all of our pod listeners and pod fam out there. We love you. Thanks for listening in, everybody. I really hope that you got a lot out of this episode. If you did, let us know. Connect with us on Instagram, send us a DM. But most importantly, it would mean the world to us if you just left us some 5 stars. We're astrologers, so we love stars. Or maybe even a kind rating really means the world to us. Some kind words. Really, it just like helps us know that you're getting a lot out of this and enjoying this content.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Have a great month.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a wonderful month. Love you.